Hello, my name is Kevin Probst, and I'm coming to you from my cozy little corner of the world here in West Central Georgia on this second day of November in 2026. I want to share with you an article that I have written entitled A Sensible Response to Snowflakery. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now looking back, I realized that I was reared by parents who used old school methods. I was the youngest of three sons, growing up in a family facing typical difficulties in typical ways. I understand now that what I didn't understand in my childhood, the motive behind all the disciplinary measures meted out to us, was to form a strong Christian character. And all of the difficult tasks assigned to us were to transform three young boys into three strong, mature, capable, and successful young men. My father was a former sergeant in the U.S. Army. He served his country as a medic stationed in France during World War II. After the war, he married my mother and began rearing a family in a small town in northwestern Pennsylvania. He was a bit anomalous. He had a very hard, sergeant-like persona that he brought into the family life from his Army days, but he was also very sentimental and easily moved to emotion. While all my friends were watching cartoons every Saturday morning, my sergeant dad stood at the foot of the stairs and called up to the three of us, "Up and at 'em, boys, we have work to do." There were no weekend leisure activities available to us until all of our chores had been done. My mother had laundry to do and a house to clean, and she would not be interrupted by the constant conflicts that erupted between three competitive brothers. We were told to go outside, after which she locked the door behind us. If you get hungry, pull an apple from the apple tree. If you are thirsty, drink from the hose. Create your own entertainment. There are trees to climb, a flowing creek to play in, wooded ravines to explore, and bikes to ride. No helmets or knee pads were required. There were plenty of risk involved when three rambunctious and competitive boys were granted freedom to explore the world. Of course, there was a possibility of getting hurt, but there was a very strong probability that we would survive the dangers that we encountered. Phrases like, "I am bored," were never accepted in our home. Saying such things generally elicit a list of chores offered as a solution to that problem. On occasion, my father would place a 410 shotgun into my 12-year-old hands and tell me to hunt the woods and don't return until you've bagged a rabbit or a couple of squirrels. He trusted me at age 12 because he had taught me well, and I had learned well the rudimentary skills of gun safety in my earlier years. My father was a boxer in the Army, and he taught me the fundamentals of self-defense. He then left me with a warning: you'd better not be the one picking a fight, but you surely must call up all of your skills and strength and stretch every fiber of your being to successfully end a fight. I was raised by parents who were part of the greatest generation. They survived the Great Depression. They endured poverty. They outlasted World War II. And the hard times that they endured helped create a work ethic and a determination that enabled them to rear a family during very difficult times. They were frugal, patriotic, God-fearing people. They knew what was necessary to survive, and they did their best to teach their children the things that they had learned along the way. My parents didn't raise any snowflakes. The term snowflake has been used to describe a younger generation often considered to be overly sensitive and easily offended. And my purpose in writing this article is not to be critical or to categorize or stereotype the whole of Generation Z. Let me offer an apology for those members of that generation who have not succumbed to its politically correct ideology, to those who are dedicated to the traditional role of being males and females in our society. Henceforth, my reference to this woke snowflake generation is not meant to include those conscientious, hardworking young people who have made previous generations so proud of them and have managed to generate shame and furious anger in their snowflake contemporaries. Perhaps it was the parents who contributed to the snowflake mentality by delivering their babies and toddlers to a daycare for 8 or 10 hours a day while they were busy climbing corporate ladders. Feeling guilty for handing over the responsibility of caring for their children to others, they tried to make up for the relational deficit by manufacturing an illusion of happiness by yielding to the demands of their children and giving them everything they wanted. A generation of youth entered adulthood believing that they were entitled to special treatment. Having always had things handed to them, they failed to learn the value of developing a strong work ethic and reaping subsequent awards. They were handed participation trophies throughout their childhood, and when they finally reached college, their performance was assessed often, not so much for academic achievement and excellence, but because they attended class regularly. Many turn apoplectic when they don't get their way. They throw little hissy fits when they realize that they are no more special than anyone else. Chuck Palahniuk summed it up well in his book, Fight Club. He said, "You are not special. You're not beautiful and unique snowflakes. You're the same decaying organic matter as everyone else. We're all part of the same compost heap." A rather humiliating thing to include in his book. I have now completed 4 decades of teaching young people in the field of education, and no one does anything for 40 years unless they really love what they do. And I love teaching, and I love investing in the lives of young people. It is my calling. It is what I believe God created me to do. And during my long tenure as an educator, I have observed the rise of a snowflake generation of young people, and I often question if I have contributed to their softness. This may be a good place to insert a familiar quote that I am compelled to share. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. I am not a product of hard times. I was fortunate enough to have lived through good times. As a teacher and father of 4 children, I often ask myself if I have been as diligent as I should be in preparing my students and my children for the difficult times that lie ahead. I am still teaching, and my present assignment is in a private Christian school in a small town in Georgia. I face more and more resistance from protective parents when I try to expose their children to the ideological dangers in our present culture. I appreciate the desire of parents to protect their children. I also believe that an extreme vigilance in protecting them often limits their exposure to the realities of life and may very well inhibit their ability to acquire the knowledge and the skills necessary to survive the impact of a deteriorating culture. This generation is now so paralyzed by fear of offending someone that they have lost the ability to define a man or a woman. Who can forget Ketanji Brown Jackson being questioned by Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn during the Senate Judiciary hearing for her nomination to the Supreme Court? Blackburn asked, "Can you provide a definition for the word woman?" And Jackson's reply was, "Can I provide a definition?" Blackburn, yeah. And Jackson said, "No, I can't." And Blackburn said, You can't?" And Jackson replied, Well, not in this context. I'm not a biologist. What was so easy for our fathers and grandfathers has become an impossibility, an impossible task for our children and our grandchildren. You don't have to be a biologist to identify a man or a woman. Many decide how they want to be identified daily by choosing certain pronouns. If your chosen pronouns fail to match reality, sensible people who feel an obligation for all that is just and true should refuse to participate in your fantasy. Left-wing bobbleheads are directed by their executive masters to filter their newscasts in ways to protect young 12-year-olds from being exposed to the coarse personality of President Trump. These same talking heads fail to reveal that that same 12-year-old has a 54% chance of having already been exposed to online pornography. Where do these people come from? And how did their priorities get so skewed? We're definitely experiencing easy times in the Western world. We have more than we would ever want or need, and yet we have an insatiable desire for even more. Do good times create weak men? I don't believe that this cyclical pattern is inevitable for all. There can certainly be exceptions, but these exceptions are only possible if there is a conscious, willful desire and effort to break that cycle. Helicopter parents that hover constantly over their children may be doing them a disservice. I believe our culture has become so corrupt that our children may very well need a greater measure of oversight and protection than past generations. However, failure to expose them to the world in which they will live their lives may be depriving them of acquiring necessary survival skills. Will they be able to recognize oncoming danger if they have never been exposed to danger? The arrival of weak times is made possible because we forget the lessons of history and the culture of our forefathers. It's very easy for politicians like Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris or Victoria Nuland to speak so flippantly about sending our young men off to fight petty wars when they have never experienced the hell of real warfare. It is very troubling to see our young men being mentored and led by warriors wearing skirts. Surely our enemies have no fear nor respect for such soft and weak men, nor do many of our young men want to volunteer to fight in a force led by feminized men. The natural solution to this problem of weakness is the inevitable arrival of hard times. Truly masculine men, created that way purposely by our Creator God, are often gaslighted by weak leaders who would make them feel guilty for their toxic masculinity. Would anyone believe that our modern-day leaders are the cream of the crop? Certainly not la creme de la creme. A nation descends into weak times when the best prospective leaders are passed over by those who are less capable. To avoid rearing snowflake children, we must be willing to expose them to some measure of difficulty and suffering. Assigning them tasks or chores that are difficult and challenging stretches them, increases the power of their will. Opportunities are provided to develop the fortitude necessary to help them survive through the hard times cycle. We must fight back against the agenda of those in our culture who would make us ashamed of that which we have been proud of. There is no shame in being proud that you are Christian, or that you are an American, or that you are white, or black, or Hispanic. We must teach our children to be strong in their beliefs and to be proud of who they are. And we must make them aware of the lies that are meant to destroy us. A true Christian doesn't hate those who are not Christian. The identifying trait of Christians is the love that they have for others. Expressing love for our own country is not expressing hatred for any other country. Being proud of your white heritage doesn't mean you hate people of color, nor is it true that non-whites who are proud of their heritage hate Caucasians. This effort to divide us must be aggressively resisted at all costs. There is a radical movement in our culture to feminize men. Weakened men lose their sense of self-esteem, and they fail to realize their intended purpose in life. According to figures released by the CDC, twice as many women in America are being treated for depression than are men. Now, a partial explanation for this may be that weak men make unhappy women. Many older men have failed to provide masculine role models for our young men. Nearly 32% of boys under the age of 18 are living in homes with a biological father present. Fortunately, there was one who presented the perfect example of male masculinity. Jesus was gentle and loving, yet firm and forceful. He grew up in the home of a carpenter and earned the calluses on his hands and his wiry frame by working hard in his father's shop. He understood the benefits resulting from working hard. He expressed his love by protecting and providing for others, and eventually by sacrificing his life for their eternal welfare. He was brutally honest with others, never compromised the truth that he shared. He instructed his disciples to bring with them on the journey that he had planned a cloak as well as a sword. The hard times coming will mold the character of another generation. The hardships they endure will make them good men, and they will produce good times once again. However, we don't have to wait for hard times to come. We can intentionally defy a culture that shames our young women for their beauty and femininity, and our young men for their strength and masculinity. I will conclude with this quote from Governor Ronald Reagan in his inaugural address on January 5th in 1967. Governor Reagan said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, handed on for them to do the same, or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was like in the United States, where men were free." If you enjoy articles like this, please hit the like button, subscribe for free, and share it with your family and friends. Thank you so much for sharing some time with me today.